Good evening, and thank you for joining Beyond Federal Recognition, What Comes Next for the People of the Darkwater, presented by Current Tribal Law and Policy, PLLC. Thank you for joining us tonight for our webinar on the impact of federal recognition. We know this is an issue that carries deep legal, political, and personal significance for many tribal communities and tribal nations, and we're honored to spend this time with you. My name is Lydia Locklear Canty, and I'm joined by my partner, Amber Holland. Together, we'll be guiding tonight's conversation and helping frame a discussion that is informative, respectful, and grounded in both law and lived experience. Amber and I are both citizens of the Lumbee Tribe of North Carolina and are the founding partners of Current Tribal Law and Policy, PLLC. Current Tribal Law is a Native women-owned law firm founded to serve tribal communities, and we represent tribal governments, tribally owned entities, individual tribal citizens, and tribal partners across several jurisdictions and levels of government, providing a full spectrum of legal services tailored to the unique needs of Indian country.
Tonight's webinar is designed to provide an overview of what federal recognition is, why it matters, and how the status affects tribal sovereignty, governance, access to federal programs, and long-term self-determination. Our discussion is for educational purposes only and does not reflect positions, strategies, or timelines of the Lumbee tribal leadership. There is not a one-size-fits-all answer to how tribes should respond to new or restored federal recognition. Every tribe determines how it chooses to engage with the federal government and how it will provide services for its citizens. Our goal tonight is not to advocate for a specific outcome, but to explain the legal framework, highlight key considerations, and create space for thoughtful dialogue. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded. Following our panelists' presentations and group discussion, we will hold a question and answer portion. Please use the Q&A function to submit questions as they come up. You must be logged into the Zoom platform to ask a question. If you do not see a Q&A option, check to make sure that you are using the Zoom app on your phone or laptop. We may not have time to answer each question, but we'll do our best. We ask that everyone engage respectfully, recognizing the importance of this event. If you experience technical issues tonight, please reach out to currenttriballaw@gmail.com, where our support team is waiting to assist you.
Thank you, Amber. We're grateful to be joined tonight by the Honorable John Lowery. John Lowery serves as the chairman of the Lumbee Tribe of North Carolina, and during his time as chairman, he has overseen the establishment of a Department of Agriculture and Natural Resources, a Department of Health and Human Services, a Department of Economic Development and Tourism, unprecedented public and private funding for the Lumbee Tribe Cultural Center, and more than $10 million more in federal housing funds, and he has proposed the largest budget in tribal government history. Just recently, under Chairman Lowery's leadership, the Lumbee Fairness Act was signed into law, which ended a 137-year effort to have the Lumbee tribe fully recognized by the United States government. Chairman Lowery holds a master's degree from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and a bachelor's and master's degree from the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. Thank you again, Chairman Lowery, for joining us this evening. I'll turn it over to you for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Lydia. I appreciate you and Amber holding this event. I think it was very timely and very wise, and I just want to thank you guys for taking the time to do it. I know the logistics behind pulling something together like this is tremendous. So once again, just thank you for doing that. I also want to thank you for bringing together a great group of panelists here. And one of the things that I want to highlight right off the bat is every one of these panelists are Lumbee. And I don't think people realize and understand the human capital that we have as the Lumbee tribe. And to be able to sit here on this panel and have someone like Dr. Arlinda Locklear, Jody Cummings, Dr. Danielle Hiraldo, AC Locklear, individuals just like this who are already doing stuff in tribal affairs across many different spectrums. And that's something that we as Lumbee people, we have to use that. We have to work with our people who who have certain expertise working in tribal communities and working with tribal affairs. Not every tribe is blessed to have this. They're not blessed to have the type of depth that we have when it comes to certain types of tribal issues, tribal concerns, tribal areas that the Lumbee people have. So, as you guys are tuning in, just stop for a minute and think, how many tribes at the onset of their federal recognition can have a panel like this where we have distinguished members of our tribe who are already so deep into tribal affairs that they're going to give us advice. They're going to lead and guide us, not us having to go out to other areas and request additional guidance from people outside of Lumbee land. We have a lot of that here, and we are fortunate. We are blessed. And so I just want to thank them for being here and thank, once again, for pulling everybody together. You all know we received our full federal recognition on December 18th. As I've said many times as tribal chairman in many different speeches, the sky's the limit for the Lumbee people. We have so much that we've already done, and we have so much more that we are going to do. And the one thing that federal recognition has done is it has opened the door for us on many fronts. Now, of course, you just don't step into the door and everything just starts falling into place. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of patience. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of teamwork. It takes a lot of pulling people together to get where we need to go as a tribal nation. I try to look at the big picture. I try to look at 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, 50 years down the road. Where are we going? Where do we want to be? Where do I want this tribe to be as chairman in the next 50 years? Come 21, 26, where are we going to be as a tribal nation in 100 years? And see, that's the way that I'm thinking about federal recognition. That's the way that when we created the Health and Human Services Department here at the tribe, we created it 3 years ago with an eye towards federal recognition, because we knew that once we received federal recognition, once we got into Indian Health Services and started doing healthcare, that we needed that infrastructure already in place. We did not need to build the infrastructure when we got federal recognition. We need to go ahead and start a Health and Human Services Department. Just like, for instance, we have a Tribal Historic Preservation Officer. We started that 4 years ago. And guess what? Our Tribal Historic Preservation Officer has been bombarded by consultation calls over the last 3 weeks, because now we're fully fairly recognized, and now he's being brought to the table to do consultations with the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, with Town Creek in the Mount, with the Smithsonian Institutes. So the thing is, we have to always be working and looking forward. We've got to be strategic, and that's what we're doing. That's what the team that we're building here at the tribe, the people that we're working with, that we will work with, we're trying to be strategic. We are trying to pull things together, and we're trying to get down this road so that in 5 years from now, you can turn and look back and say, man, this is where we were at in 2026, but now look where we are today. And even though we do have a delay on some of our services through BIA and through Indian Health Services, we're not delayed in other ways. We're not delayed through other programs and through other services. And so we're going to be going after those programs, going after those services. We're not delayed on putting land in the trust. We're going to go after that. So we're going to look at our tax policies. We're going to look at what does it mean to put land in the trust, and how can we utilize those incentives to better position our people for the future. I'm a big believer in looking at what other tribes have done and trying to understand that we can do the same thing. I tell people a lot whenever others come here from other parts of Indian country, they see what we've done, and they're like, man, you guys only have a $30 million budget. You only have a $40 million budget, and you've done all of this. I say, yes. I said, now, can you imagine if I had more? Can you imagine where we could be as a tribe if I had more? And so when I see what, for instance, the Choctaw would do in Oklahoma, when I see what the Chickasaw do in Oklahoma, when I see what the Cherokee Nation does in Oklahoma, when I see what the Pequots and Jody and them do up in Connecticut, when I see what the Catawba are doing in South Carolina, we can do that. We can do exactly what they're doing. We can get to the point where we have a $2 to $3 billion impact on the state of North Carolina. We can get to the point where we are, we either have 10,000 employees or we're supporting up to 10,000 employees, right? Through economic development. And that's where I want to go. I want to have behavioral clinics. I want to have medical clinics. I want to have wellness centers, right? That's where I want this tribe to go. I want us to be working to protect our environment, to make sure that our river is clean and that our people can use it. I want to be a leader at the state level, at the federal level. The Lumbee tribe, there is no ceiling to what we can do. And I have less than 2 years left, and I'm going to work my behind off, working with great people like the ones on this panel to help position us there. And hopefully future leadership of this tribe can continue to carry that ball. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chairman Lowery. You touched on everything that we will be talking about tonight, the importance of good infrastructure for tribes, and then healthcare, economic development, just everything. So thank you so much, Chairman Lowery, and thank you for all of your efforts on helping us gain our full federal recognition. And for Lumbee citizens tuning in, be sure to visit the Lumbee Tribe's website and social media for updates related to federal recognition. We're thankful tonight to have such a knowledgeable group of Lumbee panelists with us, and we're especially thankful to everyone who has taken time to join tribal leaders, community members, practitioners, students, and allies. We thank you. Our first panelist this evening is Arlinda Locklear, who is a prominent federal Indian law attorney with more than 4 decades of experience representing tribes in major litigation and legislative matters. She has appeared before the United States Supreme Court in landmark cases, becoming the first Native American woman to successfully argue before the court. Arlinda previously worked with the Native American Rights Fund and also represented the Lumbee tribe from 1988 until 2011 in its quest for full federal recognition. She holds a Juris Doctorate from Duke University School of Law and honorary doctorates from State University of New York, North Carolina State University, the College of Charleston, and the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. Our next panelist is Dr. Danielle Hiraldo, who is the director of the American Indian Center at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She previously served as a researcher for the Native Nations Institute at the University of Arizona. Her research explores various levels of tribal governance. Danielle received her PhD from the University of Arizona and holds a master's degree and bachelor's degree from the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. Our next panelist is AC Locklear, who is the CEO of the National Indian Health Board. Previously, AC directed federal relations at the National Indian Health Board and worked to advance tribal health policy with the White House and federal agencies. He has also served as program manager for the Center for Native American Youth at the Aspen Institute and as director of student engagement at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where he earned both his Juris Doctorate and bachelor's degree. Our final panelist is Jody Cummings, who serves as the General Counsel for the Mashantucket Pequot Tribal Nation. Jody has represented tribal governments, intertribal organizations, and entities operating in Indian country. He also held senior leadership positions at the United States Department of the Interior, including senior counselor to the Solicitor and Deputy Solicitor for Indian Affairs. Jody earned his Juris Doctorate from Columbia Law School and his bachelor's degree from Duke University. Thank you again to our panelists for joining us this evening, and I'll turn it over to you, Arlinda, who will begin by walking us through the legal foundations of Lumbee federal legislation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for the opportunity to be with you this evening to talk about something that's near and dear to all of our hearts. Let me start by saying that if you've looked at the actual terms of the statute itself, what we call the Lumbee Fairness Act, it appears as Section 8803. The reason it does that is because it is part of a much larger 3,000-page bill that Congress put together known as the National Defense Appropriations Act. So that's why we appeared very late towards the end of that statute. We're 8 pages out of that approximately 3,000-page bill. So that's why we have that large number, even though we're only interested in our provisions. So those are the provisions I'm going to talk to you about. I'm going to walk through some of the main provisions, talk about what they do and do not do, and hopefully have a chance to answer your questions. Let me start with what is the single most important provision of the Act, and that's Section 4A. And I love this language so much, I think it warrants a read. Section 4A, in general, federal recognition is extended to the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina, period. Case closed, done. Couple of observations about that. First of all, it's immediate. It's immediate. It goes into effect, as the chairman noted, on December 18th, 2025. And in fact, tomorrow, the Department of the Interior will publish its annual list of federally recognized tribes, tribes that are authorized as eligible entities to receive federal services. And for the first time ever, Lumbee Tribe will appear on that list. We know that because there is a preview of that list that appears in what's called the Federal Register Reading Room every year, and we've seen it. It's there, and it will be officially published for the world to know tomorrow in the Federal Register. Now, what that means is we have the status as a government between us and the United States. That's what federal recognition means. It's very similar to federal recognition of relations with a foreign country. For example, when President Nixon went to China and reestablished relations there, they recognized the Chinese government as having governmental authority with respect to their territory and their people. And that's what federal recognition of an Indian tribe does. It recognizes by the federal government the authority that we have over our people and our territory. Now, just as importantly, I want to say a word about what it does not do. Federal recognition does not create anything. It doesn't create an Indian tribe. It doesn't create tribal sovereignty. It officially recognizes what has always been the case. And that is that an Indian people known as Lumbee have been there since Aboriginal times and have always held and exercised inherent powers of self-government. Those powers of self-government derive from the will of the Lumbee people. They don't come from the state of North Carolina. They don't come from the federal government. They don't derive from the United States Constitution. They derive singularly and only from the people that we serve. That's why you'll often hear us, as Amber has referred us to, as citizens, because we are now officially recognized as a government by the United States. One other additional point I'd like to make here. Once this status is recognized by the United States, nobody can take it away. The state of North Carolina cannot take it away. No other Indian tribe can take it away. No other government can take it away except for the United States Congress. And that would require another act of the United States Congress. But unless and until the Congress itself passes a statute, changes that status, we will always, from this time forward, have the status of a federally recognized Indian tribe. One more brief comment on this section. You'll see that Section B refers to something called the Indian Reorganization Act as a special act it singles out among all the other federal statutes for which we are now eligible. That statute is singled out because there was a Supreme Court decision in 2008 that appeared to limit the applicability of that statute only to tribes that were recognized in 1934. So as a precaution and for other technical reasons, we specifically targeted and identified that statute as one that for which we are now immediately eligible. If you look at the next section, Section 5, which is described as eligibility for federal services. This is a complicated section, but it's really something that appears, again, like Section 4, in virtually every act that Congress has passed that recognizes an Indian tribe. It says that the Secretary of Health and Human Services, which is where Indian Health resides, will perform a needs assessment to determine what the needs of our people are. And that needs assessment will be based upon a verified role that is discussed later. In addition, it also says in the service area that our service area shall consist of Robeson and adjoining counties, North Carolina. Now, it's important to remember what that does and doesn't do. What it does is mean that every one of our members who resides in those counties will be immediately eligible for services that are rendered to members of federally recognized tribes. It does not mean that our members who live outside those 4 counties are no longer members. Not at all. They are members like they always have been, and they always will be. Nothing in this statute changes that. It simply means that there's a geographic limit within which the federal government will provide its services to those members. So that when those members, for example, folks who reside in Baltimore, when they come home, they will get the same services from the federal government that all the other members who reside in our territory will receive. In addition, it doesn't mean that the tribe itself can't pay for services to be delivered in Baltimore or in Detroit or wherever else those folks may reside. It means that those services will come and be delivered by the tribe, not by the federal government. So you have to remember there's always a distinction in federal law between services that are paid for and delivered by the federal government and services that are paid for and delivered by the tribe. They are not necessarily the same. Now, let me say a word real quickly here about the verification of the roll upon which the determination of those eligible for services depends. The statute does provide that and direct the Secretary of the Interior to conduct a verification of the tribe's roll. That verification, which appears in the same section, section 2, that same section provides that the Secretary must complete that process within 2 years. That process has already begun. The tribe has already met with the Secretary of the Interior and the implementation committee that has been set up by the Department of the Interior for the purpose of bringing us on board for federal services. So we expect that will that process will be triggered very soon if it has not already. It will be relatively easy for the department to create and finalize this process because our roll is digitized. Let me say one final word about that. If you are applying for enrollment now, there's nothing in this act that disqualifies you from applying or prohibits the tribe from continuing to accept and process applications. The only thing this statute does is freeze the roll as of the date of its enactment, which is December 18, 2025, and say that that's the roll that will be verified. And that's the role that the department itself will establish as what they refer to as the base role for which services will be available. Now, people will continue to be added to that base role once the base role is set. It's not cast in stone. It's just the initial process that's frozen by the BIA for a period of time so that they can ascertain that we have a role, that our folks meet it, and that that's going to become the basis of the provision of services that are authorized by the statute. Let me say one final word about the role issue. There's nothing in this statute that limits the tribe's authority to control or change its role. That's a fundamental concept of federal Indian law. Every tribe has control over who its folks are. We always have had that. We always will have that. There's nothing in this statute that changes that. Now, let me say a few words about Section 6, which is the authorization to take land into trust. Land into trust is an important concept in federal Indian law because that is the basis of, remember I mentioned territory that you govern? That's how that territory is defined, basically. It's to the extent of, under federal law, land that is held in trust, a reservation, or allotments. Now, this statute does not create a reservation. Just because you reside in Robeson and adjoining counties and you will receive services there, that does not create a reservation. Section 6B provides that lands that are located in Robinson and adjoining counties are going to be treated as land eligible to go into trust. Now, there is a separate process under which the Secretary of the Interior can declare trust lands once they have been acquired to be a reservation, but nothing in this statute changes that, mandates it, or directs it. So, assuming we do get land in a trust, then that land will have to be subject to a secretarial declaration, just like all other land that goes into trust, before it can be treated as reservation. One other point on this with regard to reservation status that I want to point out. Section 6B, which refers to treatment of certain lands, says that land acquisition applications that the tribe may submit that come from Robinson County will be treated under the regulations as if it were an on-reservation application. That's important because the regulations that authorize and implement the land into trust process distinguish between on and off-reservation acquisitions. On-reservation acquisitions are much easier to obtain. There is a much quicker process for its acquisition, and there's basically a presumption under the regulations and federal law that once the application is identified as on-reservation, it will be accepted and placed into trust by the federal government. So that gives us an edge in getting the land into trust. It gives us a statutory and regulatory edge. But again, it does not create a reservation. It just means that application will have a special status under those regulations for purposes of processing, but it does not, again, create a reservation. Now, let me say one final word about trust land. While we have the authority to submit trust applications, and the secretary has the authority to place land in a trust for the tribe, there is nothing that mandates it, that requires the tribe to submit an application for any given parcel. That's always the choice of the tribe. And there's nothing that affects an individual member's land status with regard to land you currently hold. In other words, nothing in this statute changes the fee title to land that you may now hold. It does not automatically become trust land. It does not automatically acquire the status of trust land, becoming taxable, inalienable, and all of those attributes. None of that applies unless you, as an individual, ask the secretary to place your individual fee land in trust. And that is possible. There is a provision in the Indian Reorganization Act that authorizes the secretary to place land into trust for individuals. However, the department does not very often do that. They usually reserve it only for those special circumstances of elderly members who need relief from taxation of their land. Or other special circumstance, but that process does exist. But again, it is not mandatory. It's strictly voluntary. You can do it or not do it as every individual tribal member sees fit. Now, if I could move on to Section 7, just a few words real quickly here about jurisdiction of the state of North Carolina. As a general proposition, states lack civil and criminal authority over Indian tribes recognized by the United States unless Congress bestows that authority. In 1953, Congress passed a statute that did authorize 7 identified states to exercise such authority. North Carolina was not one of them, however. So that in the absence of this section, theoretically, the state would have immediately lost civil and criminal jurisdiction over our members in our territory because of that general rule. But what this section does is it avoids that from happening, which could create theoretic chaos, particularly in the criminal justice area, where under what's called dependent Indian communities, the state might lose criminal authority to prosecute crimes in our territory. To avoid that happening, we have authorized jurisdiction by the state, but importantly, there's also a provision that allows for what's called retrocession. That is, when the tribe has its own tribal court system and is ready to exercise it, it can go back to the state of North Carolina and say, we are now prepared to assume this responsibility. We want that jurisdiction back. Yeah, one final word here. Section 8, the savings provision. This provision provides that there is a process under which Bureau of Indian Affairs Services and Indian Health Services will be provided to the Lumbee tribe. It also says that that process will take about 3 years. There's 2 years to verify the role. There's another year to do what's the necessary needs assessment of our folks, so that if we will not receive those services as individuals, principally health services, until that process is complete at the end of 3 years. It's important to point out, though, that really all our act does is to put in writing the administrative process that the department always applies to newly recognized tribes. In other words, while this may look different, in practice, it really isn't any different from what every other newly recognized tribe does. In fact, there is an actual guideline published by the Indian Health Service, which basically says newly recognized tribes will not receive services for 3 years until Congress appropriates money for that purpose. So while this looks to be different, it's not. It's just putting in writing the process that works for every other federally recognized tribe. So at the end of the day, that's where we are, folks. We're now just like every other tribe in Indian country. There are a lot of services for which you can immediately apply. Indian preference, for example, in hiring. Indian scholarship programs that are administered by the Department of Education. A lot of other programs, the applicability of the Indian Child Welfare Act, that applies immediately. So it's just this process for bringing us on board the service population, principally for Indian Health Service, that looks to be delayed, although in reality it isn't. It's just the same process that happens in every other case. I'm going to leave it there and turn it over to my co-panelists.
Arlinda, thank you so much. And thank you for pointing out the distinction between the federal government and federal funding and tribal government and the administration of services through the tribal government and tribal sovereignty, and how it's not dependent on the state and it's not dependent on the federal government. And so I'll turn it over to Dr. Hiraldo, and she will talk more about tribal governance and this inherent tribal sovereignty that the Lumbee tribe has.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Lydia and Amber, for inviting me to be on this panel. I really do appreciate it. My name is Danielle Hiraldo, and I serve as the director of the American Indian Center at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. For the many Lumbs on the call, my mom is Margaret Wynn from the Back Swamp community. Her parents are Mary Woods Wynn and Dorlester or Doc Wynn. And the Hiraldo, my dad's Puerto Rican. He was stationed at Fort Bragg, and we all know where that story ends. So I'm excited to be here and to be amongst my people. So much of the stuff that Lydia and Amber wanted me to cover is kind of like this 30,000-foot view, just really thinking about what recognition, what does sovereignty look like within the United States? And Arlinda did a great job of covering much of this, but I just wanted to offer a couple of things to think through as we're thinking about ways that we engage as a federally recognized tribe and what that might look like. So this is a great graphic of the different sovereigns that are represented within the U.S. Most of the times when we take a civics class, we know that the U.S. government is organized under a federal system, right? So we have the federal government, we have the state government, We have local municipalities. What is often left out of that discussion is the tribal governments and that inherent sovereign status that we've maintained since time immemorial. And that's very different than our kind of racial classification that occurs with other minority groups. And we have opportunities to exercise our sovereignty in different ways because we are now federally recognized. And so just to kind of give you just a little bit of definition and understanding of these different recognition and classifications, I have a slide next that talks about federal recognition and state recognition, and what that looks like. It's all grounded in that political status that we have a relationship, a government to government relationship with the federal government and the Lumbee tribe. For state governments or state recognized tribes, often those are government to government relationships that have been developed with the state in which they share geography. And of course, there are now 575 federally recognized tribes, and there are about 67 state recognized tribes in about 16 states. And so this next slide has just a quick map, and it tells you the different it just kind of gives you a survey of the lay of the land when it comes to recognition. So you can see on the East Coast, there are many states that maintain both federally recognized tribes and state recognized tribes. And that has to do a lot with the historical experience that happened here on the East Coast. California, there are a couple of recognized tribes, federally recognized tribes. And then there are also non-recognized tribes, so tribes that did not create a external relationship with a government. And so what can we do? What's the difference between these statuses? And so this next slide, it's not an exhaustive list, but it kind of gets into some of that information that Arlinda was giving, such as Indian Child Welfare Act and the other resources that are available to us now that we are federally recognized. So sovereignty, the quick and dirty definition that I like to use is the ability to make and enforce our own law. As federally recognized tribal governments, we can do that. Lydia, are you ready for me to move on, or can we stay on that list one for a little bit?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. We can define our citizenship. So we've been doing this from since the 70s, right? We've been defining that in order to be a Lumbee tribal enrolled member, you have to prove descent from the 1900 and 1910 census. But in addition to that, you also have to demonstrate how you've maintained contact, how you understand who your people are, right? And we've created rules that ensured that you could meet that specific requirement. Resolve disputes. There are, in the contemporary setting, many tribes have created courts in order to resolve disputes. Some tribes are remembering some traditional ways of dispute resolutions, and they're incorporating that into their contemporary governing systems. The IRS, there are some specific IRS codes that are available to federally recognized tribes. I work in kind of the nonprofit sector, so tribes that are federally recognized can, through tribal law, create nonprofits. There's a specific 7871 code within the IRS that allows the creation of charitable contributions to be made within tribal governments as well. Public Law 638 is colloquially is the colloquial term for the Indian Self-Determination Education Assistance Act. This is an opportunity for federally recognized tribes to access funding, and either through contract or compacting. That a lot of times that looks like community block grants, and these large funds come to the tribe, and the tribe has ownership of how those services or programs are delivered. There's tax. The chairman talked about tax and what that might look like. Federally recognized tribes have been developing very sophisticated tax codes within their communities. We can build economies, preserve our culture, and then manage our resources. And so finally, I just want to offer some food for thought as we're thinking about ways to strengthen our governance system in this new era of federal recognition. So for 14, 15 years, I've worked with the Native Nations Institute, where we worked on the ground in tribal communities looking at ways to strengthen their governance system. And so I've offered a couple of examples for us to consider and see if they work or not for the Lumbee community as we're stepping out in federal recognition. So that slide here has a couple of examples of tribes really thinking about what does, as the chairman talked about, what does our community look like 50, 100, 200 years from now? And they're doing some of that strategic planning. So there's the Quinault Indian Nation. This is a great example of a tribe that had originally gone through that 638 process, but realized that, you know what, we're only really administering what the BIA was doing. We're not really taking ownership of this, and went through this priority setting and strategic planning with the community, identified priorities, said, this is what we want our nation to look like. This is what works for us. This doesn't work. And they put that down in a document called Quinault Community Roadmap. And they allowed their tribal citizens to come in and do some of that visioning and incorporated that into the administration. So everyone from the directors to the folks that were doing intake, they had a part of developing and making sure that that vision was being met by the community. And then there was that feedback loop, right? So not only are you doing that visioning, you're also communicating to your tribal citizens how you are meeting those goals and those priorities that you've defined. Porch Creek Band of Creek Indians is a great example where they adopted a value statement. So a lot of times, I know when my uncle was on tribal council, they did some strategic planning, and sometimes those plans aren't always articulated or shared with the citizens. So Porch Creek, they were doing some strategic planning, and there was a little bit of tension, and they wanted to know, well, when I make decisions, I'm always thinking about this. I'm thinking about family. I'm thinking about, our culture, our practices. And when you make decisions, you're thinking about that. And what they ended up doing is coming together and saying, we're going to adopt a set of values that as Porch Creek Indians, that we're going to make sure that our government tries to meet and tries to uphold. And they adopted that value statement. They put it before the tribal nation, and they amended their constitution to include that value statement. So now whenever there are candidates that are running for tribal council, they're asked, how are you going to uphold that values? How are you going to uphold our values here at Porch Creek? And that's an opportunity for the citizens to also hold their elected leaders accountable. Another example around strategic thinking, this is very specific to administrative department at Confederate Salish and Kootenai tribes. They created a human resource development department. And this is a department that has some of its social services, such as TANF, LIHEAP, and others. And their statement was, we want stable families. We want self-sufficient families. In order to do that, we need to make sure that our community members know the type of services that are being provided. So they organized their social services into one-stop shop, where they had one application that tribal community members would come in. They would sit. Sometimes there was an aptitude test that they would take, and then that intake process included someone from the tribe sitting down and creating this career path with them. So in order for a Salish and Kootenai tribal member to be self-sustaining and to have those stable families, they wanted to make sure that they knew how to get access to the resources that they needed. The chairman talked about our strongest asset within our community is our tribal people. How are we thinking about building our leaders? So Lac de Flambeau up in Wisconsin, they had, through their education department, had a candidate endorsement training. And this was just an opportunity for folks that were interested in running for office. They would put their name in, and it's all voluntary. And they had an opportunity to go in, learn about federal Indian law, learn about the different processes within the government, learn about the different initiatives. And, at the time of election on the ballot, that person who went through the candidate endorsement training, there's a little asterisk there. So you might not know Danielle Hiraldo, but there might be an asterisk by my name. And you can say, oh, well, she went through that training, so she might have some knowledge or information that I think would make a good candidate. So that's one way to think about how we build our leaders. Citizen Potawatomi Nation is also another good example where they were originally in the Great Lakes. They experienced several rounds of removal, and they have citizens similar to Lumbee all across the U.S. And they wanted to make sure that their youth knew what it meant to work in their community, knew what it meant to be in these departments and these programs. So they created this internship program. It's paid. They're able to come in and have that experience, and also be able to learn what it means to build as a part of the tribal government. One of the last things that I want to mention, as we're moving forward, years ago during my dissertation, I remember meeting with when I was working on my dissertation, I remember meeting with a former tribal citizen, and this is what she told me when we talked about state recognition and what that means. The only thing I could say is that sometimes we have the sovereignty. We think we have. We say we have. And I believe we have internal sovereignty. But you are still going to be under the North Carolina law. Even being state recognized, that is the way it is. I think there is some issues that are going on internally, because if law isn't written by the government, then you go with common law. Then you think what's happening to us now, us being state recognized, we're looking at North Carolina state law more than trying to handle internal sovereignty that we can handle within ourselves. And so thinking about what it's like to be in this new land of governance and ways that we can strengthen how we are delivering and meeting the needs of our people is really exciting. And I look forward to this new era. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hiraldo. Thank you for pointing out those examples of what other tribes are doing. Chairman Lowery touched on this as well, and I think it's important for everyone to know that every tribal community is different, and what works for one tribe may not necessarily work for another. But it's always great to explore those opportunities and programs that other tribes are implementing. Speaking of tribal programs and implementation, I will turn it over to you, AC, to talk about healthcare for tribal communities following federal recognition.
So thanks, Lydia. So excited to be here tonight and so honored. Again, my name is AC Locklear. I am the son of Anthony and Terry Locklear from Pembroke, and the grandson of Delton and Sarah and Locklear and Pauline and Earl Ransom. And I'm super excited and honored to be here as the CEO of the National Indian Health Board. We represent all federally recognized American and Alaska Native tribes in advocating for the health and welfare of American and Alaska Native people. And, it's extremely honored to be able to see this transition for the Lumbee people and to be a part of it. So what I really want to do is to, really help explain what federal recognition means for healthcare. And when I say healthcare, I mean health in general. It's not just healthcare as going into your doctor's office and getting direct services, but for the health and well-being of Lumbee people. And you can continue to the next slide. So federal recognition, as Arlinda mentioned, is not an overnight switch. It doesn't mean immediately we are able to deliver healthcare services through Indian Health Service. What it does mean is that we are able to remove barriers. It opens pathways so that the Lumbee tribe can now have the opportunity to design, control, and strengthen healthcare systems over time. So it really is an opportunity to look at what is potentially possible. So I know Danielle talked about 638. What it does mean is that we have the opportunity to either receive services through Indian Health Service, or as a tribe, take those services on and provide those ourselves. So when we also talk about healthcare, we're talking about more than just clinics. Healthcare includes, the things that make people healthy in the first place, like access to clean water and sanitation. It includes food and nutrition programs. It includes chronic disease prevention. It includes behavioral mental health support. So this includes substance use and prevention and recovery services and crisis responses for Lumbee people, often delivered in our community and not outside of our community. For elders, it means that there are going to be opportunities for in-home supports, transportation to appointments, caregiver assistance, and long-term care planning. For children and families, it can include early childhood screening, school-based health services, and family wellness programs. And in many tribal communities that we see across the country, healthcare also includes culturally grounded approaches such as traditional healing, community gatherings that reduce isolation, and language and cultural programs that support mental and emotional well-being. So healthcare isn't just necessarily where we go when we're sick. When we are able to, as a tribe, exercise our sovereignty and self-determination, it means that we have the opportunity to create systems that keep our community safe from the beginning so that we aren't necessarily dependent on the healthcare services that we need once we're sick. Next slide. So one of the most important things to really understand is that federal recognition creates eligibility, not instant services. So what's now possible is that, we are eligible for Indian Health Service. Recognition makes it possible for our tribal people to access these federal healthcare programs. And what Indian Health Service it's the federal government's the federal government meeting its trust responsibility to provide for the health and well-being of American Indian Alaska Native people. It is one of the few federally run health systems. However, it's only one part of the Indian health system. So that is one option that our tribe could, exercise their sovereignty and determine that they wanted to do. The other is taking those services on themselves and working to create either clinics or compacting or contracting to take those services on themselves. Also, it ensures our eligibility to be able to access urban Indian clinics. So there are urban Indian clinics all across the country. I know that Maryland was mentioned earlier. There are a lot of Lumbees in Maryland who have been and can continue to access urban Indian clinics and receive services at those places. So it's not just those within our tribal area, but there are also urban facilities across the country and also other Indian Health Service facilities across the country that would be eligible to receive care from. But building healthcare systems takes time. It's one of those things that it's not going to be overnight. It's not going to be in the next 2 years. It may not be in the next 3 to 5 years. Many tribes phase in these services over the years, starting with public health or behavioral health programming and expanding it beyond that. And this transition really matters. We want our tribal government to really do this in a very intentional way so that we're really using our sovereignty to provide for the specific needs of our communities, not necessarily, what has worked other places, but what really needs to work specifically for Lumbee people. Next slide. So I know I mentioned the Indian Health Service, and that is a starting point. It's not the whole system. Tribes will choose how to engage with it. And as I mentioned, we can choose to self-governance, we can choose to compact or contract, and we could choose whether we want direct or federal care. In practice, it's one piece of a broader system. This also includes Medicare and Medicaid. It includes grants across the Health and Human Services, across the federal government. It includes tribal resources. Next slide. One of the things that really is a benefit for the tribe is how recognition interacts with existing coverage for things like Medicare and Medicaid. There are a lot of benefits that folks who are already eligible for Medicare and Medicaid can receive. It includes things such as no enrollment time period requirement. So American Indian Alaska Natives can enroll in Medicare and Medicaid at any point. There is no restrictions as for many other people. There are also things like work requirements that many folks across the United States are now having to deal with that American Indian Alaska Native people, including Lumbees, will be exempted from. So these are certain things that really are beneficial, but also if the tribe chooses to contract or compact and provide these services themselves, they're able to bill Medicare and Medicaid. They're able to have that third-party reimbursement and invest that back into our community. So they're able to invest it in language programs. They're able to invest it in public health programs to educate our community about how to be healthy. They're able to invest it in fitness programs or to invest it in food sovereignty and protection programs. So it is really about this long-term investment in our communities and being able to access a lot of these fundings that we weren't able to access before. Excited? So as I mentioned, it's really about at its core, self-determination. Healthcare really is sovereignty in action. It is the most explicit way that we see tribes really exerting their sovereignty across the country. It is really about local control. It's about the tribe looking at the community and seeing what the need is, and being able to address that and having the sovereignty to do that. Just like the state, just like the local government can say, hey, these are the issues affecting the community. Let's invest our resources there. This really allows tribes to be able to do that. And not only be able to do that, but do that culturally responsive to the community. So they can tailor it to whatever way they need to that really meets the needs of the community. It allows them to develop workforce. It allows them to have better health outcomes and address everything in the way that we need it to be addressed. Next slide. So really the key takeaways here is recognition really creates eligibility. It's not instant services. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. There are things such as, the exemptions to Medicare and Medicaid work requirements and things like that that are instantaneous. Access to urban Indian clinics are an option for those who are in urban settings and have that access. But it really is something that is going to be designed over time and based on the needs of our community. And it really is about strong governance that enables our health systems. So when we're thinking about it, we can look forward to opportunities to really build out a public health system that really addresses a lot of our health needs in advance and not just necessarily once we're sick. So there is a lot of opportunities, but it will come over time, and it is something that happens overnight. But that is all we have for health. I'll pass it on.
Thank you, AC. And you touched a little bit on economic development and using healthcare to bring funds to the tribe, to pour back into the tribe. And we know healthcare in Indian country is so important, and it's definitely bolstered by tribal economic development. And so I'll hand it to Jody Cummings to talk about economic development in Indian country following federal recognition.
All right. Good evening, everyone from chilly Connecticut. My name is Jody Cummings. I am the son of Mike and Quay Cummings from Chicken Road, somewhere between highways 72 and 211, and the grandson of Foy and Bloss Cummings of Pembroke and Joseph and Retha Simmons of Clinton, North Carolina. So I want to make sure I shout out my Cohary family tonight. It has been the honor of my legal career to serve as the general counsel for the Mashantucket Pequot tribe for about the last 6 years. Some of you may know that the Mashantucket Pequots own the Foxwoods Resort Casino and really are one of the pioneers of Indian gaming. And they've been doing that for about 30 years. But they've got business ventures that extend far beyond that as well. And during this time I've been with them, it's really given me a fresh look, not only into how tribal governments work, but also what tribal economic development can look like. So I want to spend just a couple of minutes tonight talking about the what and the why of tribal economic development. I texted the chairman after he made his comments tonight that he'd already done my job for me with his intro. It was excellent, Chairman. But I do want to put a little color on some of the things that he talked about. And I'll just start with the obvious headline that tribal nations are and really the business entities that they own are really in every business sector of the economy that you can think of. I was fortunate enough to come across a report that the Center for Indian Country Development at the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis put out sometime last year that said, if you look across the sectors of the economy where tribal businesses and tribal governments are operating, they said in leisure and hospitality, um, and of, I don't know, maybe 4,000 tribally owned businesses that were identified, 25% of those businesses were in leisure and hospitality, which includes casinos, hotels, and restaurants. And that's no surprise to anyone. Indian gaming has enjoyed great success across the country and really has been one of the bedrocks of tribal economies. If you look at the data that the National Indian Gaming Commission put out this past summer about the health of Indian gaming, in 2024 alone, I believe the Indian gaming industry did about $44 billion in gross gaming revenue. But if you go back to that same CICD report, while a quarter of tribal businesses are in leisure and hospitality, that means three-quarters of those businesses are in a whole lot of other industries and business initiatives. So, if you can name it, I believe there are tribes out there that are in it or they're looking at it. So manufacturing, tourism, forestry, retail businesses, mining, natural resource development, fisheries, government contracting, construction, utilities, healthcare. The list can go on and on. And I think anybody that's familiar with the Lumbee tribe and what our tribe is doing from economic initiatives standpoint, knows about the success that we've had with Lumbee Tribal Enterprises and the good work that's being done with respect to 8A contracting. It's interesting that 8A contracting is now being heavily scrutinized, we'll say, by this administration, and tribal governments and their businesses are, really giving a hard look at, will the 8A contracting program survive, or what's it going to look like, at least over the next couple of years. So, it's this conversation that we're having and thinking about economic development and other opportunities in Indian country. Really is timely. I think in light of that and thinking about the success that not only Lumbee has had in that space, but tribes across the country. I do want to talk about gaming just for a second, not because I want to emphasize it, but only to the extent that there are questions about it, and there's lots of speculation. Is the tribe going to go into gaming? And I'm not offering support or opposition to that concept at this point, but just a couple of things to point out. One, if that gaming is to occur on tribal trust land, it's going to be governed by the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act of 1988, which is a federal law that was passed by Congress. And a couple of things to consider. Any trust land where that gaming would occur would have to be land that is determined to be eligible for gaming. And then certain forms of gaming that could occur, assuming that the land is eligible for gaming, what they call Class 2 gaming, which would be bingo or similar games, can be operated without a compact in the state where the tribe is located. And there are tribes out there that are operating just Class 2 gaming operations. The Porch Creeks down in Alabama is a great example of that. And if you talk about Class 3 gaming, which is essentially the full menu of gaming offerings that you could think of, that would require a compact with the state. And so, right now we know that the Eastern Band of Cherokee as well as the Catawba both have compacts with the state of North Carolina. But those are some prereqs to gaming activity occurring. And the other point I just want to make about this is, IGRA is very plain about revenues that are derived from Indian gaming. They really have to be put back into funding tribal government operations or providing for the general welfare of the tribe, and a handful of other requirements as well. So, that's a tightly regulated area. But beyond gaming, and where I've been at Pequot for the last 6 years, and you'll see this across Indian country, tribes are doing so much, and I mentioned that at the outset of my comments. But here, for example, operating an outlet mall or bringing a new hotel and a water park to the reservation, an agricultural business that we have, a healthcare business, and a pharmacy. So really the options are limitless, and I think that to kind of parrot some things that the chairman was saying. What are the tools that we need in order to do that? One of them, I really do think trust land is crucial to that. Why? Because it provides the tribe, when it's exercising its jurisdiction over that land, the opportunity to really set the legal and regulatory framework in which businesses will operate, whether that's our own business or creating an inviting regulatory environment for other businesses that we might want to bring to Lumbee Trust Land to operate there. So that's really important that the tribe can do that, and you see that happening all over Indian country as well. Tribes in the regulatory environments they set through their exercise of jurisdiction, being able to attract businesses that might not otherwise decide they want to site in that state or in some town or in some county where regulatory requirements are different or the law is different. So taking land into trust is an important tool. The other thing I'd point out is our ability to use business forms that protect the tribe's sovereign immunity and ensure that we've got every tax advantage available. So Arlinda talked about in the Lumbee Fairness Act that citing to the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934 and making it crystal clear under the law that law applies to Lumbee. One of the benefits of the IRA is that tribes can form Section 17 corporations. Tribes can also charter under their own laws, LLCs or other corporate forms. And that's important because, among other things, the Treasury Department just confirmed late last year that those types of business entities, Section 17s and wholly owned, tribally chartered entities, enjoy the same tax status as tribal governments themselves. So that's that's really important when you start thinking about the success of tribally owned businesses and advantages that they can create for themselves. And one other thing I want to just jump back to trust land for a second is thinking about the opportunity to invite other businesses onto tribal trust lands or any businesses that we're owning on those lands is the question of our ability to tax the activity that occurs on those lands. That's often an issue that's fought about a bit in Indian country. We've had struggles with that here at Mashantucket, but the ability of a tribal government to raise revenues from the economic development activity that occurs within its lands, obviously is just a core demonstration of its sovereignty, but also, can provide some really good revenue streams, in the same way that the county does or that a state does. So, I want to talk simply about why do this. Why do we care as to whether the tribal government has successful business initiatives? A couple of things. Number one, I think about the adage, a rising tide lifts all boats, right? So, and Pequot is definitely an example of that, but you see this around Indian country everywhere. When you see successful business operating on tribal lands, look at what's happening in those jurisdictions outside of tribal lands, in the county, in the state, in the nearby towns. And you've got job creation for the citizens in those jurisdictions. You've got businesses who may not be citing themselves on tribal lands, but next door to tribal lands, who are successful because of what's happening in Indian country, that creates additional economic activity outside tribal lands, but it also raises revenues, tax revenues for those governments where those businesses are sited. Um, the other thing, and I think one of the points that the chairman was talking about early on was how our generation of funding from or revenues from our business activities really opens the door for how we can supplement government services that we've talked about. AC talked about health services. I know that's been one of the things that folks have been so excited about. But I'm here to tell you that that is great, and I look forward to all the services we're going to get through IHS and BIA and any other agencies that are going to provide services to our people. But you ask any federally recognized tribe in the country, and they'll tell you, what the federal government is doing is not enough. We've got to have our own way of supplementing that. And so, I was looking at something a good friend of mine from the Mohegan tribe. She was talking to the press recently about Indian country funding, and love what she said. Indian country, I don't love the fact of this, but the comment I think really encapsulate what I'm trying to say. Indian country already operates at a deficit across education, health, and economic measures. Federal services like IHS and BIA are also chronically underfunded and understaffed. For example, the IHS Budget Formulation Work Group estimates full funding at $73 billion annually. Current IHS funding is about $7 billion. The gap is enormous. How do we fill that gap? How do tribes in general fill that gap? It really is about their ability to produce revenue themselves through their economic initiatives that help them to fill the gap and provide services for their people. And that is the real key in my mind to self-determination and fulfilling that goal. Thank you, Lydia.
Thank you, Jody. That was great. We know that the federal government underfunds Indian country consistently and tribes. That's why economic development really is key to building those infrastructures. Your healthcare, your hospital, your clinic, your school, your tribal school. Economic development really is key. So thank you, Jody, for that. We'll now transition to a brief group discussion because we want to save time for some Q&A from our participants who joined us tonight. But my first question is for you, Chairman Lowery. What's the one key takeaway that you want the audience to leave here after tonight's discussion?
All the opportunities. There's a ton of opportunities. My staff and I, over the last 4 weeks have been looking at all the different things and learning. And, as I've said numerous times on the different videos that I've put out, we have to be patient. And, we have a small staff who's already doing a whole lot of other things, and now we're bringing this over, right? And so we're learning, and everything that you've heard from every one of these panelists, we've heard a lot of that, right? And so we're trying to, carry it out. We're trying to get in a position. We're trying to get the right legal minds and the right expertise, and and just trying to figure out what steps comes next. I had a conversation with our speaker of the tribal council, Alex Baker, last week. There's so many different ordinances that the tribal council is going to have to pass. They're going to have to pass a ton of ordinances to get us in line with some of these things that we're talking about. When you talk about ICWA, Indian Child Welfare Act, we're already seeing a ton of those cases. We are getting a ton of calls, but guess what? We don't have anything on record, officially, on how we are going to govern ICWA from our point of view. So, and then when you get into the healthcare stuff, when you get into the economic development stuff, when you get into just exercise our sovereignty, there's a ton of opportunities here, and it's not going to happen overnight, as Arlinda has stated. But the opportunities are here, and we're going to grab onto those opportunities and we're going to work on those opportunities and we're going to push these opportunities forward for our people.
Thank you, Chairman Lowery. Jody, my next question is for you. You talked a little bit about this, but how does federal recognition open new pathways for tribal economic development and long-term sustainability? We talked about being strategic. And then here's the second part to that. What are some of the risks to tribal economic development?
Yeah, I think in terms of opening the door to other economic development opportunities, it really is. I think it puts us on an even playing field with any other tribal nation, first of all, so that, to the extent any activity we're doing or anybody who's looking to cite business in Indian country, Lumbee sits right along with any other federally recognized tribe at this point. So that's one of the things that comes to my mind. In terms of concerns that I would have, I think it's tied to that first point is that, I've seen this a lot in my work for tribes over the years. People will come out of the woodwork with crazy things that they want to do. And so tribal governments need to be very careful and they need to absolutely vet to every extent possible and so carefully any opportunities that are presented to them. So, I couldn't urge more caution with that.
Okay, Jody, thank you. That is so true.
Yeah.
AC, what does federal recognition mean for healthcare access and delivery for our tribal citizens?
For sure. As I kind of mentioned earlier, federal recognition really changes healthcare access and delivery by creating eligibility and authority, not by delivering instant services. It really allows a tribe to participate in a federal health system, should it want to participate in a federal health system that was previously unavailable, and the opportunity to also design a healthcare delivery system in ways that reflects communities' needs. So that means if it chooses to have hospital systems, clinics, it can do so. If it chooses to receive services directly from Indian Health Service, it can choose to do so. If it wants to pour that funding back into the community and create language programs, create youth and elder programs, it can do so. It is really, like Jody said, one of the biggest economic development opportunities outside of gaming for Indian country, and it's going to continue to grow. So in practical terms, it really means that it makes the tribe eligible to engage with IHS and to access this federal funding, or choose to, do other, whether it's compact those fundings. It's also an opportunity to access grants that would not previously available through Health and Human Services. So access grants was the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. So whether that is accessing behavioral health services, accessing harm reduction services, also accessing public health infrastructure funding. So to create a public health system that is ran and driven by the tribe. So we're talking about educating our youth, educating our elders about public health initiatives, being able to have epidemiologists who are doing, community assessments, that are doing surveillance. So if there is another COVID, if there is another instance like that, our tribe has the sovereignty and the ability to effectively do whatever is humanly possible and needed for our community and not have to answer to the state, not have to answer to the county, and is able to drive that themselves. So if we need to lock down our borders, we can lock down our borders. If we need to provide vaccines, we can provide vaccines. And we do not have to look to the federal government for a yes or no, because we have this recognized sovereignty to do so.
Thank you, AC. Tribal sovereignty, exercising tribal sovereignty. Super exciting. Arlinda, can you just take a minute to explain why recognition is not just symbolic, but a matter of legal and political self-determination?
Yes, thank you for that opportunity. What I'd like to point out is that there's nothing in this recognition that shapes, changes, or limits our Constitution. The Lumbee tribe has a constitution that we adopted as an exercise of self-governance by the Lumbee people. We don't have to change that at all. In effect now, the federal government has said, we recognize that as creating a legitimate government, and you all go with God and do as you please. There are certain limits. There is a statute called the Indian Civil Rights Act, which theoretically imposes some limitations. Not theoretically, it actually does. Some limitations on what tribal governments can and cannot do. But they're really very narrow, much more narrow than those that the United States Constitution, for example, imposes on states. We have a lot of flexibility, and importantly, federal law acknowledges that those are all culturally attuned and related. In other words, if we have a cultural way of doing things, even though that may not be constitutional for a state, it may be acceptable to us. And that's what federal recognition allows us. It gives us the scope to exercise our government the way we view it and the way we have always done it. There's an important Supreme Court decision from 1978 called Santa Clara Pueblo versus Martinez. And in that case, the Pueblo there had a way of defining its membership that some folks didn't like. There was a lawsuit about it, and the member claimed that was a violation of her equal protection rights under the Indian Civil Rights Act. And the Supreme Court said, we're going to be very sensitive to that because they have a different culture and history with regard to the way they define their membership, and they're entitled as a recognized tribe to do that. That's what sovereignty means. And the court held in that case that as a result of that, the Pueblo could not be sued to compel them to change their membership criteria. That's what federal recognition now gives us. It gives us that space, that legal space to exercise and experience our history and culture the way we always have.
That was beautiful, Arlinda. Thank you. Dr. Hiraldo, how does federal recognition strengthen the tribe's inherent sovereignty rather than create it? And we've talked a little bit about this already, but please reiterate that for us.
Yeah, it provides an opportunity for access to resources that we didn't have before. But at the end of the day, I think it's important for us to remember that we know our community best. We have the solutions here with our people. And that's what federal recognition opens the door for. It allows us to explore what those solutions are to the issues and to some of the questions that we have within our community. And yeah, I'm excited about that.
Beautiful. So thank you, Dr. Hiraldo, and I'll turn it over to Amber for Q&A from our participants tonight.
We've been monitoring your questions all night and have pulled a few for our panelists to answer. If you have questions, you can submit those using the Q&A function. We will not be able to answer all questions tonight, but we're going to do our best, and I may combine some questions that are similar. Our first question is regarding enrollment. There are lots of questions about how the tribe decides who is a citizen and when the tribe will open enrollment for children and those in the area, in the territory.
I guess I will take this one. So pretty much just to stay as general as I can, we have some base roles, and and they are the 1900 and the 1910 census. And in order to be an enrolled citizen of the Lumbee Tribe of North Carolina, you have to have a direct descendant on one of those base roles. The reason why those are our base roles is because that's the first time the United States counted tribal members in its census up to that point. And so our base roles are those census documents. And so if you can trace an ancestor directly to that, then you have a good opportunity of becoming an enrolled citizen. Now you also have to maintain contact with the tribe, and just continue being a good citizen. Now, overall, we are looking to open enrollment. We have not decided yet. I do have to bring that before the tribal council, and we will agree on when we will open up enrollment. I do think that there is a consensus among the tribal council and myself that when we do open enrollment, because we are currently overwhelmed, we only have 2.5 people who work in enrollment, and currently we are limited to 100 people a day coming in just to re-up. we will look at focusing just on our youth first to be enrolled. So those, born all the way up to the age of 18. So because they are still minors, they can fall up under their children. And, a few years ago, we actually started a campaign here at the tribe where we tried to encourage people, please bring your children, get your children enrolled, let them get enrolled now while they're young. And it's not nowhere as difficult as it is when they become an adult. And so, hopefully now that we have recognition, we can definitely get those children in and they can get enrolled because there are a lot of different opportunities for them. Matter of fact, as I've been on this panel here, I've actually had a couple people texting me about scholarships and getting their children enrolled. So, but we are looking to open up enrollment again. But once again, you have to be a direct descendant. You have to maintain contact. And those are the basic principles of being an enrolled citizen of the Lumbee tribe.
Can I just add quickly to what the chairman just said? That's absolutely right. And it's important to point out that those criteria for membership that the chairman described were set by us. They are a matter of tribal law. They were not set by the federal government. The federal government has not, and because we're recognized now, still cannot tell us who our members are. We make those decisions. One final point on that, because I saw some questions about it. There's nothing about tribal citizenship that affects your status as either a state or federal citizen. By virtue of a statute Congress passed in 1924, all recognized tribal members are also citizens of the United States and citizens of the states within which they reside. So your status as a citizen of the United States in the state of North Carolina or wherever you reside is not affected by the fact that you are now a member of a recognized tribe.
And let me throw this in there too. If you have a current active enrolled card and it is not inactive, you do not have to come to the tribe and get a new card. So I know there's some misinformation floating around out there. I can't stop the rumors. I try. I can't do it. But if your card's active, you're good. Trust me, you're good. You do not have to come down here and get a new card. I promise.
Thank you for those answers. The next question, I believe, would best be suited for AC. As regarding healthcare, there are urban Indian organizations like Native American Lifelines where Lumbees that are living near Baltimore area can already receive healthcare. Can you speak a little bit more to our citizens who maybe live near another federally recognized tribe that has an IHS clinic, and also whether or not their individual incomes will impact whether they can receive healthcare through IHS?
Yeah, those are all great questions. So there's a few layers to that. It's a little bit iffy in law, but it's been well recognized since the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act and the definition they use for tribes that at urban Indian or clinics or organizations at Lumbees, even before federal recognition, were eligible to receive benefits. So they will continue to be able to go to those clinics. There are some things that the tribes has to do in order to, with the roles as Arlinda alluded to and John alluded to earlier, the chairman, that really make that eligibility possible for Indian Health Service. So those who may be living near an IHS facility, and that's not an urban facility, we'll probably have to wait for the eligibility piece a little bit later down the road. In terms of income or other things like that, so the way it essentially works is that, and to be eligible for Indian Health Service, once the eligibility is determined, any American Alaska Native person can go and receive free healthcare at a IHS clinic or facility. That it's not like an insurance card, right? So you are only able to get free services at that clinic or somewhere they refer you to. So if they don't have specialty care, say you need, or orthopedic doctor or orthopedic surgeon, they would refer you out. But otherwise, that free healthcare is only there. Now, there's a lot of different other options that may happen if the tribe chooses to contract or compact those services. But ultimately, there's a limited amount of funding, and there's a lot of issues with Indian Health Service, right? So that's why a lot of tribes choose to take those services on themselves. But typically, it's not a insurance plan, so it doesn't follow you everywhere you go. It's only for those clinics, hospitals, or facilities where that eligibility resides. It does open up, so it doesn't really impact your eligibility for Medicare and Medicaid, right? Medicare, you're still going to have to meet that age eligibility. Medicaid, you're still going to have to meet that income or poverty level eligibility. However, it does open up a few different opportunities in terms of to prevent any issues with the marketplace or prevent any issues with enrollment. And it does kind of allow a few flexibilities that don't exist for others who are eligible for those plans. So you still have to meet the income eligibility. And if you are employed and you receive, your benefits or your insurance from a third party by your employer, that is still critical, right? Like we want to make sure that those within our community still have access to healthcare who don't already have it. And that's going to be a critical thing that we're going to have to think about as a people. We want to make sure that those who don't already have it are the ones who are able to receive it. And it just really adds on and creates a healthier community if we're able to do that.
Thank you for that answer. The next question goes to jurisdiction, which is something that Arlinda discussed when reviewing the legislation earlier. And I realize that this is way in the future, but is there a possibility that the tribe, North Carolina, and the federal government might share jurisdiction over criminal matters sometime in the future?
Yes, that is possible. It's very complicated. It depends on whether it's a misdemeanor or a felony. It depends on where it's committed, and it depends on by whom or against whom it was committed. So there are a lot of layers, particularly in criminal jurisdiction. But we do have the opportunity to discuss all that going forward in the future as the tribe becomes more sophisticated in terms of its institutions. It can, if it chooses, establish tribal courts and take on some of that responsibility itself. It would do so as part of a negotiation, a three-way negotiation with the Department of the Interior as well as the state of North Carolina. And then by agreement, almost like a treaty, we could then take on that authority. So yes, that is possible.
Thank you for that answer. Criminal jurisdiction in Indian country has always been quite a quagmire throughout the history of the relationship between tribes and federal government and state. As we're running up on time, I'm going to go ahead and close the Q&A. I realize that there are several questions that haven't been answered, and quite a few have been dropped just now. Well, maybe I'll just pick one more. Since we have y'all here. Given that the BIA's official list is going to be published soon, what immediate impact should tribal individuals expect to see?
Well, let me just say the publication of the list is basically just a formal notice to the world as to what has already happened. So the publication of the list won't change anything legally. It's just a statement to the world that it has changed and that the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina is now recognized. So you won't see anything change as a result overnight of the publication of that list tomorrow, just like nothing changed overnight when the president signed the bill. Your status has changed overnight, but the implications of those changes and how those will manifest themselves in different parts of your life will fold out over time. And it depends on the context and the circumstances as to each particular question. And so you really can't give a sweeping answer as to all of those.
Thank you. And I know I said that was the last question, but I've got one more. I think it's just really great. This person wants to know, how can we help as tribal citizens? What can we do to serve the tribe? And is there an effort to pull from our talent pool?
So let me say this. We are working internally to create some type of portal. One thing about our tribe, there's over 65,000 members. And a lot of people want to provide a lot of help to do a lot of things. And you know, I joked with Jody about the Pequots having only 1,200 members. And I can imagine Chairman Rodney Butler can speak to all 1,200 within a couple of weeks. Unfortunately, we have a hard time, you know, connecting with the thousands of Lumbees who do want to do something, who do want to help. And I say that, you know, kind of laughing, but I'm serious. We're huge, and there are a lot of people. I mean, my phone rings all the time, emails come all the time. People come here, people call, they want to help, and I know they do. But at the same time, day to day still going, right? Day to day. So we're trying to figure out something internally, an email system or something other where folks can say, hey, I'm so and so, I have expertise in so and so, or I have an idea about so and so, and they can send it in. So because I can't manage all the people who do want to help us, and I do appreciate it, and I respect them, and we got to figure out a way that we can touch these individuals who can help us out. And so just know, you know, people, like I say, they reach out, they say, man, I've been trying to reach out, been trying to get, and I'm telling you, like I literally have 6, 7, 8 meetings per day, just with different people, different groups, whatever going on. And so just be patient with us. We're trying to work out something internally so people can say, hey, I do want to help. And I appreciate the hundreds and the thousands who do want to help. I really do. But we do hope that we can create some type of mechanism internally where people can say, I do want to help. I do want to participate. I have these expertise. I can do this. I can bring this to the table. And we can sort through that, and we can see who can help us and who can assist us, and who can help lead us into the next 10 to 20 years.
Thank you, Chairman Lowery, and thank you, Arlinda, Jody, AC, and Danielle for joining us tonight. Thank you, everyone who tuned in from home. We've had well over 600 folks online with us tonight, and I hope you all stay warm this upcoming weekend, and to make sure you look in on your elders and your pets.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a
Good
good
night,
evening.
everybody.
See everybody soon.